239 days, the same steel walls, the same faces, no escape. The US Navy discovered that boredom kills faster than missiles and spent millions engineering a system to fight it. How do 5,000 people trapped in the middle of the ocean turn boredom into a weapon instead of letting it destroy them? Let's break down every insane method the Navy uses to keep sailors mentally alive at sea. 97,000 tons of steel, 5,000 sailors. No land in sight for months. Each sailor allocated just 3. 2 square meters of personal space smaller than a parking spot. You wake up in a berthing compartment shared with 60 other people. Your rack is stacked 3 high, 60 centimeters of air between you and the person above. You work 12-hour shifts. Then you pull watch duty on top of that. When you finally get a few hours to yourself, there is nowhere to go. No bar, no park, just steel and ocean. In 2022, the USS George Washington became a tragedy that shook the entire United States Navy. 11 sailors took their own lives in a single year aboard one ship. 11. The Navy could no longer pretend this was a morale problem. This was a systemic crisis, and it demanded a systemic answer. The public fears Houthi ballistic missiles, drone swarms, anti-ship cruise missiles skimming the wave tops at Mach 0.9. But ask the commanding officers what keeps them awake at night, and the answer is not a weapon system. It is day 120. Research published by the Naval Health Research Center shows the rate of adjustment disorder increases by 34% after the 4th consecutive month at sea. Doctors call this threshold the first breaking point. No radar system can detect it. No phalanx CIWS can shoot it down. And it is coming for every single person on that ship. A lieutenant commander just landed his FA-18E Super Hornet on a pitching flight deck at 2 in the morning. Live strike mission, weapons engaged. Threat calculations running at combat speed. 90 minutes later, he is standing in a food line waiting for a soft serve ice cream cone. That image is not absurd. That transition from combat to ice cream in 90 minutes is a deliberate, engineered psychological reset, built into carrier life with the same intentionality as a flight operations schedule. The Navy learned something brutal. A sailor who cannot mentally decompress does not just suffer. He becomes a danger to himself, to his shipmates, and to the mission. What the USS Eisenhower proved during its 239-day Red Sea deployment is this ship fought a kinetic war against Houthi forces simultaneously with a psychological war against isolation, monotony, and mental collapse. Both wars were real. Both wars had casualties. Both required a deliberate strategy and ruthless execution. A distracted sailor makes mistakes. Mistakes on a ship carrying nuclear reactors, live ordnance, and 5,000 human beings are not recoverable. Boredom is not a personal inconvenience on an aircraft carrier. It is a mission-critical threat. If this gave you a new perspective on what it means to serve, hit that like button and subscribe. Over 95% of you are watching without subscribing, and it costs you nothing. The first weapon the Navy deploys against that invisible enemy is not a missile. It is sweat. And the engineering behind how they use it is far more complex than anything you have seen in a recruiting commercial. What happens inside those gyms when 5,000 people are fighting to stay sane in 3.2 square meters? And why did the Navy design the entire fitness system like a combat doctrine? The USS Abraham Lincoln carries 9 separate gym facilities distributed across her hull. 9 deliberately scattered across different decks and different sections of the ship. The civilian instinct is to ask why. The naval engineering answer has nothing to do with convenience. It is damage control doctrine applied to human performance. If a fire breaks out and isolates an entire section of the ship, standard combat damage protocol on a Nimitz-class carrier, sailors in that section cannot access a centralized gym. Physical recovery stops, stress accumulates, performance degrades. The Navy does not accept single points of failure in weapons systems or propulsion. It does not accept them in the systems that keep human beings functional either. The USS Gerald R. Ford operates 3 dedicated gym facilities totaling 3,085 square feet, larger than most American suburban homes. stocked with commercial-grade equipment from Hammer Strength, Life Fitness, and Matrix Fitness, the same brands found in professional NFL and NBA training facilities. The Ford-class design allocated this space specifically because previous Nimitz-class carriers were chronically under-equipped for a crew of 5,000 under sustained psychological stress. When operations allow, sailors run a 5K loop on the open flight deck under actual sky with nothing but ocean to the horizon. For sailors who spend entire shifts below the waterline, that run is not exercise, it is oxygen. An aviation boatswain's mate operating the emails catapult on a Ford class burns an average of 4,200 kilocalories per day through physical labor alone. The daily expenditure of a professional marathon runner in active training. A body that is not actively maintained will not break down slowly or gracefully. It will break down suddenly and completely. Physical fitness on a carrier is not a lifestyle choice. It is a maintenance requirement for human machinery operating at combat tempo. On the USS George Washington, the same ship that suffered 11 suicides in 2022, a program called Total Body Fit began with 12 sailors showing up voluntarily. No mandate, no commanding officer order, just 12 people who understood they needed something more than their rack and their watch rotation. Word spread through berthing compartments and mess decks. Within months, over 200 sailors were showing up regularly. Music, a proper sound system, instructors who knew how to build energy in a room. Suddenly, working out stopped being a chore and became the highlight of the day. That is not a fitness story. That is a story about what happens when human beings in extreme environments find structure, community, and purpose, all three at once. Sage is a Labrador retriever assigned to the USS Gerald R. Ford. Sage runs with sailors during flight deck 5Ks, sits in high traffic areas during peak stress periods, and deploys to spaces where the psychological temperature is running hot. Sage is not a mascot. Sage is a certified working asset under the Navy's Operational Stress Control K-9 program, trained to detect acute stress markers, elevated cortisol indicators, abnormal breathing, social withdrawal. When Sage approaches a sailor sitting alone at 0300, that is not a random interaction. That is an intervention. The program exists because the Navy learned one hard truth. Human beings in crisis frequently will not talk to other human beings. They will, however, pet a dog. In a berthing compartment housing 60 sailors, physical condition is visible in a way that rank sometimes is not. The sailor who posts the top PFA score, who runs the flight deck in the rain at 0530, that person occupies a different status in the unspoken hierarchy of the compartment. A perfect PFA score earns a 48-hour Special Liberty Pass and a formal entry in your service record. But the sailors who pursue it are not doing it for the paperwork. They are doing it because in a world with no landmarks, no difference between Tuesday and Saturday, a PFA score is proof that time was not wasted. That is a psychological lifeline disguised as a fitness test. Sweat keeps the body standing. But when you have stared at the same steel walls for the 147th time, a strong body is no longer enough. So what do they do with the eyes and the mind teetering on the edge? The answer involves satellite dishes, a Super Bowl, and a psychological theory that has nothing to do with the military. The USS Gerald R. Ford did not just add entertainment spaces. She redesigned the entire concept of where those spaces live. On older carriers, lounges sat adjacent to berthing compartments. The result was predictable game noise at 0-200 sleep disruption, compounding fatigue on top of compounding stress. The Ford moved lounges to entirely separate compartments, away from sleeping areas with walls engineered to 45 decibel acoustic isolation. That number matters. 45 decibel isolation is enough to kill the sound of a PlayStation tournament bleeding into a rack 303 bulkheads away. But the more important effect is neurological. When the acoustic environment changes completely, the brain registers a different space. It stops being the ship. For 60 minutes, it becomes somewhere else. That is not interior design. That is applied psychology built into steel. The Shipboard Network Architecture Program. SNAP runs a hard-tiered bandwidth hierarchy across every carrier in the fleet. Combat operations sit at the top, administrative functions second, education third, entertainment last. During high-intensity combat operations in the Red Sea, the entertainment tier was throttled to 15 to 20% of total available bandwidth. Streaming quality drops, load times spike. Some content becomes inaccessible entirely. The sailors know this, they accept it, because they also know that when the ship drops to a lower operational tempo, bandwidth opens back up and the lounge fills back up with it. The system is not generous. It is rational. It allocates a scarce resource according to mission priority while keeping the pressure valve functional even at minimum capacity. On Super Bowl Sunday 2024, the USS Eisenhower was operating under MCON emission control protocol. In MCON, electromagnetic transmissions are restricted to reduce the ship's electronic signature in a threat environment. Streaming a live broadcast means opening receivers, activating satellite uplinks, generating signals. That is a tactical consideration, not a technical one. The decision to stream the Super Bowl that night was made at commander level. It was not made because football matters. It was made because the ship's medical officer had flagged crew morale as approaching an intervention threshold. The game was approved as a clinical decision, documented and deliberate. 1,200 sailors crowded into every available screen space on that ship. For 4 hours, in the middle of an active combat zone, they were just people watching a football game. The ship's stress indicators dropped measurably in the 48 hours that followed. Psychologist Ray Oldenburg spent decades studying what he called third place theory, the idea that human beings require 3 distinct environments to function: home, work, and a third space that is neither bars, coffee shops, community centers, places with no agenda, no performance requirement, no rank structure. When third place disappears, stress has no outlet. It does not dissipate. It accumulates quietly, invisibly, until it surfaces as something clinical. On an aircraft carrier, home and work occupy the same steel hull. There is no leaving. The lounge redesign on the Ford class was a direct architectural response to Oldenburg's framework, even if no one called it that in the procurement documents. The USO centers on the Eisenhower served the same function during 239 days of continuous deployment. A space that looked different, felt different, smelled different. Comfortable chairs, mood lighting, board games. A slice of civilian life preserved in amber, mounted inside a warship. Wi-Fi on modern carriers is limited, monitored, and tiered by operational priority. But it exists. Sailors can video call their families, and most do, gratefully, hungrily. What the Navy did not anticipate, and what military family life counselors began documenting in force during extended deployments, is what happens afterward: post-call depression. The phenomenon is consistent and well documented. Sailors frequently report feeling significantly worse in the hours following a video call home. The distance, abstract and manageable before the call, becomes suddenly concrete. The child who grew 2 inches, the kitchen that was repainted, the dog who paused at the door waiting for someone who was not there. MWR departments on major carriers now schedule counseling availability, specifically around organized family communication windows, not because calls are discouraged, but because the emotional aftermath is a known variable that requires a known response. What is harder to isolate? The absence of the internet, or the absence of the people on the other side of it. The gym keeps the body upright. The screen keeps the eyes occupied. But what keeps 5,000 people from turning on each other in a space with no anonymity, no exit, and no neutral ground? The answer is something more primitive than entertainment. It is the oldest social technology human beings have ever invented: the need to beat someone at something. The Battle E Award, battle efficiency, the program that grants the highest performing department or division on a carrier the right to paint a red letter E onto their equipment and weapon systems. Not a medal. Not a bonus. A painted letter on a piece of machinery that every sailor on the ship walks past every single day. The visibility is the point. On a ship where anonymity is impossible and reputation is currency. Public recognition painted directly onto the tools of your trade functions as a social pressure system of extraordinary power. It was designed that way. The Navy understood centuries before behavioral psychologists formalized the concept that human beings in group environments will work harder for visible status than for invisible reward. Morale, welfare, and recreation on a Nimitz-class carrier is not a volunteer committee running pizza nights. It is a formal department with dedicated full-time staff, 8 to 12 personnel on a standard deployment and an annual operating budget of $2 to $3 million. MWR plans, funds, schedules, and executes the competitive programming that runs continuously throughout a deployment. Sports brackets, trivia leagues, fitness challenge leaderboards posted in high-traffic passageways. These are not spontaneous eruptions of fun. They are managed interventions sequenced deliberately across a deployment calendar to create regular peaks of engagement and community in the months most likely to produce psychological deterioration. During the 2024 Red Sea deployment, the USS Eisenhower hosted an internal dodgeball tournament that drew more than 800 participants, approximately 1 in 6 of the entire crew. The tournament ran at 1400. 4 hours later, flight operations resumed with live strike missions over Yemen. The commanding officer who approved the tournament schedule did not do it despite the operational tempo. He did it because of it. High-intensity combat operations generate stress that accumulates faster than normal routine can dissipate. The tournament was a pressure valve, scheduled with the same operational logic as an ordnance resupply. Time it right, and you put 800 people back on station with their nervous systems reset. Time it wrong, and the pressure finds its own outlet. On an aircraft carrier with 5,000 people and no anonymity, the most powerful disciplinary force is not the uniform code of military justice. It is the birthing compartment. When your squadron loses the dodgeball bracket, 60 people in your sleeping space know before you get back to your rack. When you skip the fitness challenge 3 weeks running, the leaderboard in the main passageway announces your absence to everyone who passes it. No officer needs to say a word. The social accountability loop runs itself invisibly, constantly, with a sensitivity to individual behavior that no top-down and regulation system can replicate. Money games are prohibited under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. High-stakes gambling on a warship creates debt, resentment, and conflict, the last things a commanding officer needs at sea. And yet, friendly competition with small stakes has existed as an unwritten tradition in the United States Navy for as long as there has been a United States Navy. Commanding officers know it happens. Most choose not to see it, not from negligence, from judgment. A $5 poker game running in a berthing compartment at 2,200 is a social event. It is 4 sailors sitting together instead of sitting alone. The commanding officer who shuts it down to enforce the letter of the regulation has not made his ship safer. He has made it quieter in a way that is far more dangerous. That calculus, when to enforce, when to look away. And why is the kind of leadership intelligence that never appears in any training manual. Competition keeps the fire burning. But there are sailors who find something stronger than fire, a reason to grow. What happens to those people on the other side of 239 days will change the way you think about what isolation actually does to a human being when you stop fighting it and start using it. Military psychologists have mapped the emotional arc of a long deployment with enough precision to identify specific thresholds. The most consequential falls between day 90 and day 120. Before that point, the brain operates in a holding pattern, managing the present while waiting to return to the normal. After that point, something shifts. The waiting stops. The brain stops treating the ship as temporary and begins restructuring its understanding of what is real, what is home, what is possible. Psychologists call this the wall. Commanding officers call it the danger zone, because the wall cuts both ways. Sailors who hit it without structure, without purpose, without forward motion, they sink. They become passive. They count days on a bulkhead. They are present in body and absent in every way that matters. But sailors who hit the wall with something to build toward, they do something different. They accelerate. The Navy Retention Study of 2023 identified a pattern consistent across multiple ship classes and deployment lengths. Sailors who engaged in self-directed learning, creative projects, or skill development during extended deployments re-enlisted at a rate 27% higher than those who did not. The mission did not change. The ship did not change. The ocean did not change. What changed was what a sailor chose to do with the hours between watch rotations and sleep. NCPACE, the Navy College Program for Afloat College Education, allows sailors to take accredited college courses while deployed, not online in a loose but aspirational sense. Accredited coursework, transferable credits, counted toward a degree. Sailors have finished complete associate's degrees over the course of a single 4-year enlistment without spending a single day in a physical classroom. The deployment that felt like lost time was, for those sailors, the education. A cryptologic technician aboard the USS Eisenhower picked up a camera during the 2024 deployment because he had nothing else to do with his off hours. No particular talent, no formal training. He started shooting what was in front of him: flight operations. Sunrise over the Red Sea, the faces of his shipmates at 0400 when the exhaustion stopped pretending. By the end of the deployment, his work had been submitted to and accepted by the Navy Art Collection, the official archive of artistic works documenting naval service throughout American history. He did not come home a professional photographer, but he came home with something he did not have when he left an identity outside the uniform. A proof of self that 239 days of isolation had forced into existence. The deployment did not take that time from him. It gave him the conditions to build something that comfort never would have demanded. NASA's HISEAS program, Hawaii Space Exploration, analog and simulation places crews in isolated habitat environments to simulate the psychological conditions of long-duration space missions, including eventual missions to Mars. The research framework HISEAS uses to study isolation, monotony, interpersonal conflict, and cognitive performance under extended confinement draws directly from United States Navy deployment research. The same findings, the same thresholds, the same interventions. The lessons learned in the berthing compartments of Nimitz-class carriers, the damage control approach to gem distribution, the third place architecture, the structured competition calendars, the post-communication counseling protocols. These are being studied and adapted by the people planning humanity's first crewed mission to Mars. The USS Eisenhower is not just a warship. It is a laboratory, and its sailors are not just service members. They are the data set that will take human beings to another planet. When the USS Eisenhower pulled into port in July 2024, families flooded the pier. The deployment had lasted 239 days. The crew had fired 155 Standard missiles and 135 Tomahawk Block 4/5 land attack missiles. They had shot down hundreds of drones. They had rescued 25 civilian mariners from vessels struck by Houthi ordnance. Not one sailor abandoned their post. Not one crew abandoned the mission. Not because they were not afraid, not because it was not hard, but because they were equipped with two kinds of weapons. The kind that launch from a Mark 41 vertical launch system, and the kind that grow from the inside of a human being who has been given the tools, the structure, and the space to refuse to be broken. The question is not what the Navy did for these sailors. The question is what you would do with 239 days and nothing left to distract you from becoming something. What lesson from these sailors can you apply today without needing an ocean?